We have a couple minutes before 10, so I do want to wait 2 more minutes in case any more media people join us. But let me just introduce myself, do a sound check. Can you all hear me? Someone give me a thumbs up if you can. We good? Good, thank you. I'm Bruce Afran, and I'm the attorney for the group that has filed litigation in New Jersey, challenging any future imposition of masking and other isolation orders as to children in New Jersey schools. So I appreciate if some media people could just say who's here. I see NBC 10 is here. Are you audible? Can people hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I see NBC is here, WABC TV is here. I don't see any other indication, so can anyone else identify themselves from media organizations, please?
I'm from NJ Spotlight News, Brenda Flanagan.
Thank you, Brenda.
Good morning.
Good morning. I mentioned NBC and ABC. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, please feel free. I see NBC. Good morning. I don't see NBC. Sorry. Thank you. And you are?
Marla Diamond, WCBS Radio.
Thank you, Marla. Good to see you.
Hi, Brenda.
And is there anyone else from media organizations I haven't mentioned yet? Okay, thank you. So it's now, well, it's 9:58. Let's take 2 more minutes. I just want to make sure no one misses out if they're joining in at 10. Thank you all for being very prompt. Just a background, my name is Bruce Afran. I think you have that in your materials. It's A, F as in Frank, R, A, N as in Nancy. And I'm the attorney for generally a group called Free New Jersey Kids, Free NJ Kids. In addition, we have several plaintiffs consisting of 3 parent groups and approximately 12 high school students who've joined in their own names. Just by way of background, when you see the complaint, you'll see initials in the complaint. The federal court requires initials of minors in court documents. So we don't have their names on the document, but I believe at least 2 of the students are joining us today. Bethany McMahon, am I correct, Kelly? And Bethany, are you here? Is Bethany here? Unmute yourself, please, so I can know. I want to be able to call on you appropriately.
Sorry about that. Yes, Bethany should be on any minute.
Okay, and I understand that Kaylee Bodine is joining us today, a student as well. Is that correct?
Yes, they are here.
Okay, are they here?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, so just for anyone in the media, you are free to use their names. They are participating willingly and their parents have consented. So as to Kaylee and Bethany, though their initials appear in the court document, you are free to quote them by name. In addition, we have 3 parents available, Kelly Ford, we have Jamie Bodine, and Ryan Cody, if I'm correct. And all 3 are named plaintiffs as parents in this litigation. So it's 10 o'clock, so let's officially begin. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce the subject. Then I will ask our 2 students and at least one of our parents to give a brief statement of why they're participating in the case. And then if that's all right, I'll open this to questions. If anyone from the media has to leave early, please just raise your hand and interject. I don't want you to miss an opportunity to raise any questions. So good morning, I'm Bruce Afran. I am an attorney based in Princeton, New Jersey. I have been retained by a group known generally as Free NJ Kids, and in particular by a group of parents and high school students who are appearing in their own names independently. The purpose of this lawsuit filed in federal court is to block any future masking and isolation and segregation orders as to New Jersey school children beginning in September once school resumes. There are some summer programs, but this lawsuit really will not affect those. There just won't be time for that. But we are seeking an order from the federal court on First Amendment grounds primarily and equal protection grounds to block future such orders as to children in New Jersey schools. In addition, the complaint has two individuals who seek an order preventing testing, COVID testing of children without parental consent. That refers really to the general type of nasal testing in which a swab is introduced into the nose. In some cases, that is not done effectively. In some cases, it's very painful, and the parents are seeking an order blocking mandatory testing in the absence of parental consent. So there should be no invasive testing without parental permission. The case deals with the masking and isolation orders that the governor implemented basically once classes resumed this past March. As you know, virtually all classes were remote in New Jersey until March, when schools began coming on half-time. This lawsuit seeks to prevent the reinstitution of those masking and isolation orders. The complaint details examples of these orders. They consist, as you know, of universal masking of all children in public schools from the time they get on a bus until the time they get off the bus in the afternoon to go home. During the school day, masks have been mandatory for all children in all grades, with the exception of two very brief mask breaks, or when children were allowed outside during a lunch recess. Otherwise, children in New Jersey schools were forcibly masked literally 8 hours per day in school. In most cases, they were surrounded on their desks by plexiglass shields surrounding 3/4 of the desk, a 3/4 square. Children were not permitted outside of that square without a mask on, and in many cases, they were required to wear the mask even inside the plexiglass shields. No children were permitted closer contact indoors than 6 feet of any other child in the school system. The only exception being during gym class when such was not practical, or outside recess when children were permitted closer contact. The lawsuit asserts that these orders violate the First Amendment rights to speech and association and privacy of New Jersey school children. The orders actually limit the ability to communicate in many significant ways. We all know that nonverbal communication is fundamental to human speech. Children especially are developing their communication skills. They're first learning what these nonverbal cues are. We know that most communication is not really the words used, but the gestures, the smile, the frown, the facial expressions, which are fundamental. In fact, in the law, we require juries to see a witness precisely because facial expressions are so important. Young children especially are first developing this knowledge. For children to be masked all day and to have their teachers masked all day prevents basic communication developing between children and between children and teachers and staff. It prevents children from developing communication skills. Young children who are in first grade or second grade don't have these skills fully. Even older children don't. These rules invade a basic sense of personal privacy. They impede the ability to learn to communicate. They actually block much communication. They chill expression. They chill the ability to form friendships and associations. We all know how difficult it is to relate to another adult when our faces are masked. One doesn't know, is there a smile there? Is there reception to conversation? The normal cues we need are lost when children are masked all day long. The keeping of children isolated in plexiglass is an alienating experience. It's a type of imprisonment within a classroom. The forced separation of children 6 feet from each other is unnatural for children of any age and any grade. It is really an experiment in terms of managing and educating children, never attempted in the US before. And no one in New Jersey or elsewhere has studied what the effects on development of children are from these techniques. The lawsuit says that these are not only in violation of basic fundamental liberty rights of children, but there's no rational basis even for them, because children are not known to be susceptible in any real way to COVID. There's been virtually no child mortality of any significance from this disease. And adults in the school can easily be vaccinated and take precautions from any transmission. There's simply no need, the lawsuit says, for these harsh and frankly draconian measures to be universally used within our schools. Now, the question may arise, why are we bringing this suit now when the governor did rescind those orders as of July 4th of this summer? The reason is the governor reserved the right to reinstate these orders based upon any new guidance received from CDC or other sources. And the governor gave school districts the right to independently impose such orders at will. So there's a very realistic chance that come September, these orders will be reinstated. You know, we frankly have to acknowledge there's a political issue as well. Governors, being political animals, want to take tough measures so no one can blame them later if things go wrong. And so children are being used in a sense as tools, basically in a great experiment, as well as one that has political implications. The governor does not have statutory power to do these things. There must be public hearings under what we call the Administrative Procedure Act, which requires public hearings before rules imposed limiting children's rights can be executed. None of that has taken place. The Commissioner of Health, the Commissioner of Education have held no hearings on such masking and isolation rules. The legislature has never approved of them. And these rules are fundamentally outside of the law. More importantly, they violate basic federal constitutional rights. The final point I want to address is that none of these rules were imposed on the general population as of the middle of May of this year. Beginning then, all rules in restaurants, bars, theaters, stadiums, in all public places outside of mass transit and health facilities were lifted. Literally dozens of people could now crowd at a bar. Hundreds of people could be in a restaurant, a supermarket. Thousands could be in a stadium, sitting next to each other in close quarters. But school children were still kept by the governor's rules on these draconian and extreme masking and isolation requirements. There's just no logical reason, especially since children are not known to be truly susceptible to this disease, and all of the teachers and staff can get vaccinated. And for those small number of staff who may still be susceptible despite vaccination, precautions for them can be taken. They can wear masks, they can be behind plexiglass if need be. We don't limit the rights, the federal constitutional rights of 1.4 million school children, simply to protect a very small number of adults in the school who may be susceptible even with a vaccine. And since we allowed vast contact in all areas of life in New Jersey beginning in May, no reason can exist for continuing such rules on school children, who frankly are emotionally our most vulnerable population. So this lawsuit seeks to block any future orders from the governor on these grounds. And the only way we believe the state can impose such rules is if it demonstrates a compelling scientific need to keep children uniquely isolated and masked. We think this interferes with the development of children, their relationships with their family, with other children, their inability, it causes an inability to develop friendships, and it fundamentally damages children's education. The last point I'll mention, and this is in the complaint, a new element came into our schools because of these masking orders. All day long, repeatedly, teachers are telling children, keep the mask up, put it back on your nose. Children are constantly disciplined verbally if the mask drops down. Even small children who generally can't keep such a thing constantly on their face are disciplined repeatedly throughout the day. This fundamentally destroys the educational environment, and it fundamentally violates the right of privacy of children. We need to remember children are citizens, children have rights under the Constitution, and can't be used or treated in this way in their public schools. Thank you for hearing that introduction. Let me introduce very briefly two of our students and see if they have any comments they'd like to make. Let me call first on Kaylee Bodine. Kaylee, are you here? If you are, just open your screen and indicate that.
Yeah, she's here.
Okay. Kaylee, would you like to give any comment to the journalists who are present as to why you've chosen to join this case?
I chose to join because I think it's really important that we try to get the masks, like the mask mandate, lifted completely. It's okay.
Well, do you have any feeling as to the effect of it on you when you've been in school? Would you like to share any of that with reporters?
He's saying, what was some of the things that you experienced? Some of the things that were.
Well, I felt that asthma attacks were a little more frequent, along with a couple of panic attacks since I felt like the masks were kind of smothering. And I was also fidgeting with them a lot because they were making me uncomfortable, and I didn't like
Okay, well, thank you, Kelly. I believe Bethany McMahon is present. Is Bethany here? I don't hear Bethany. Okay, I don't think Bethany is with us. So let me just turn to Kelly Lapine Ford, who is actually the parent leader of the Free NJ Kids group that formed the basis for the lawsuit. Kelly, would you like to make any statement to the reporters as to your reasons for organizing this case and for joining this case?
Yes, hi, I'm Kelly Ford. I started this organization called Free NJ Kids because my son and daughter, who are in high school, did not go to school because they couldn't handle the masks. It was too filled with anxiety, and it didn't feel like school to them. Both of them ended up having to see counselors because virtual learning was really, really tough. It's just not the same at all. But most importantly, my son he's on the spectrum. So he is a special education student, and he needs to see people's facial expressions in order to understand what's going on with reading people's facial expressions. That's how he makes his connections. That's how he understands what people are saying to him and if it's okay for him to say, interact. So he couldn't actually go anywhere, but especially in school. Now, they did offer to have him wear a face shield, but they said the face shield had to be from here and covering, and that was no good either. It would just cause too much anxiety. So essentially what they did is through this mask mandate, a lot of kids, especially the special ed population, were forced to stay home because they just could not do the masks. And I sat on my hands for a year thinking, all right, I'm gonna just see how this all plays out. And when it was lifted, it was right when we kind of started this, because I started to hear that it was going to happen again in this September. And I said, this can no longer stand. This is not right. Then when I started to get the word out on Facebook, I was looking at it, of course, from my children's perspective. But when I would drive by elementary schools and see all the kids separated in masks, walking, it was almost like a prison yard. They weren't playing anymore. And I just said that this is wrong. Then I started to hear stories from parents. We have horrifying stories of what goes on in the classroom when the doors are closed. And some teachers are extremely afraid and extremely strict. And when you're dealing with little kids, you don't know what that teacher is saying to that kid when the door is closed, to that child. We have situations where children have nosebleeds and they do not take off the mask for fear of getting in trouble. We have pictures of masks with nosebleeds in them. We have a story of one parent whose daughter threw up in the mask and did not remove it because she was afraid of getting in trouble. We have situations where the kids are chewing on the masks. The masks are constantly wet all day. So that's not healthy as well. And then you also have the rashes that develop around the ears and the face. And those are just the physical parts of it. Really, it's the psychological toll that we all believe it's taking on our children. And the parents and everybody who has contributed to this organization through GoFundMe believes that if we don't stand up for our children, the masks are not going to go away. Even if they say it goes away in extreme heat, they're just going to bring them back like it looks like it might be happening. So that's why we feel as parents we have to do something.
Thank you, Kelly. Let me just turn to, we have two other parents. I want to be brief about this, but Jamie Bodine, if you have any comments, please feel free.
Yes, I just want to say I actually have 4 children, Callie being my oldest. Callie's diagnosed with anxiety since she was in the 1st grade. I brought this to the attention of the school, and it just, it was one of those things that really, it was just like, whatever, she still has to wear the mask, even though it was affecting her anxiety, as well as her asthma. I have 3 other children as well who all kind of experienced it in a different way. My 12-year-old actually was getting what they call masked knee, which is really just an overall broad name they give to folliculitis, amongst other things that are rashes on the face. She also had a tonsil stone and mouth issues where her gums were swelling up this year, which some say they believe is caused by the bacteria that cannot escape. It's just kind of being trapped in a mask. My 8-year-old actually compared it to child abuse. She came home crying one day, wrote a little letter, and compared being forced to wear a mask to child abuse. And my youngest, who has an IEP and is in a self-contained classroom, came home crying numerous times, saying that he could never take his mask off or he'd get in trouble. And in fact, outside, he said, they say we have to be 6 feet apart, but he doesn't even know what 6 feet apart is. So, I mean, that's just, all kids are kind of experiencing this in different ways, including my 4 children. So yeah, I just think it's time that we fight back and get these kids their freedom back.
I was muted, excuse me. There's one, thank you, Ms. Bodine. There's one more parent, if Ryan Cody is here. Ryan, you're the father of a younger child. Would you like to make a few comments?
Yes, absolutely. This is, can you hear me, Bruce? I'm sorry.
Yes, we hear you fine, thank you.
Excellent. This is my son, JJ. JJ is a kindergartner, or he was in kindergarten this past year. He's going into 1st grade next year. He's struggled with it personally. He's a tough little guy, so he was able to tolerate it. I actually gave him the option. My wife and I actually gave him the option after they started off the school year completely remote, which just is not good for a kindergartner. They start off the year completely remote for the first 7 weeks. Then they went back in on, just a variation of multiple hybrid type schedules, never a full day, never a maskless day within school. So it was tough on a little guy like JJ being in kindergarten. But Bruce, you hit on the main point. These little ones, they've always been at the lowest risk for serious COVID-19 infection. But under the lockdowns and school closures and mask mandates, these little guys have suffered the most. And I think the biggest travesty of this whole situation is that right now in the state of New Jersey, adults pretty much have all of their rights back. But these little ones still don't. He still has to go to camp with a mask on. My school district, Bordentown Regional School District, he's still going to have to be masked in the fall. And it's just completely absurd that you can go to a bar, a restaurant, a sporting event, a concert, and you'll be, as you should be, you'll be completely fine without a mask. But these little ones who were always at the lowest risk for serious COVID infection still have to wear a mask. And every single teacher in the state of New Jersey is either fully vaccinated or has the ability to get vaccinated immediately. So it just doesn't make any sense. And we're it's the science doesn't support it. And that's why we've joined the suit, and we've been just vocal advocates of removing the mask mandates and removing mandatory testing. On testing, I'm one of the parents who is opposed to the testing without parental consent. I've been COVID tested before. I was negative, but it's not a pleasant experience as a 39-year-old man having that cotton swab shoved way up your nose. It teared my eyes up and made me gasp and sneeze a couple times. And I couldn't imagine at will the school district being able to do that to this little guy or my other little ones in the district as well. So thank you for all you're doing for us, Bruce, and thank you to all the other parents, and thank you for the press to giving this very important topic the attention that it deserves.
Thank you, Ryan, for your comments. Let me basically now I can turn this open to reporters who are present. I know there's some people are observing. I would ask only that media people ask questions, and I would appreciate if people could adhere to that. Is there anyone from the media who has any questions to myself or any of the others who've spoken? I don't know if there's a raise hand button, but just speak out, please, if you do.
Hi, it's Brenda Flanagan from NJ Spotlight News. The courts have upheld basically that the government has the right, in order to protect public safety and welfare, to impose these kinds of mandates. So how do you respond to that when essentially the governor is saying this is for the health and safety of the kids and the residents in New Jersey?
Well, thank you, Brenda. I'm glad you raised that. Actually, that's not true. Virtually every court that has addressed these issues around the country has ruled against these mandates. The only time courts have succeeded, that states have succeeded in these cases, is where the cases were brought by plaintiffs pro se, on their own without lawyers. In California, there was litigation upholding masks in restaurants, on outdoor restaurants. But in virtually every state where these cases were brought, the state laws were declared unconstitutional because they're overbroad and they don't come about through the normal lawmaking process. We have procedures in which agencies can issue orders if they hold hearings, if they have testimony showing the scientific need, if the public can cross-examine the experts, and if the public can testify. And only then can these rules be created. And in every state where the rulemaking process was challenged, where governors did this unilaterally, the courts have ruled against the states. New Jersey is unique in that there have been no litigations, as far as I know, except with respect to the gentleman that ran the sports club who was in a criminal proceeding. But in every state where these rules were challenged, the challengers have won. And the other point is that the governor doesn't have the right, nor does any agency, to limit fundamental rights simply because they're trying to protect the health and safety of people. In order to limit basic rights, to impose these limits on the liberty of the citizen, government has to have a compelling need to do so. Where children are not known to be susceptible to this disease, and where adults working with children are all vaccinated, the government can't simply impose these rules just to be sure no one gets sick. There's a very high bar when government limits constitutional rights. That's what Governor Murphy has lost sight of. And that's what this case is about. And that's why we brought this case to federal court, where frankly, these types of constitutional challenges are more common. If anyone has a follow-up question, of course, please jump in as well, Brenda. Yes,
I have a
Marla.
question.
Yes.
Yeah. If, there's this Delta variant on the rise across the country, and cases are going up in a lot of states, not so much in New Jersey, but say, they start to go up again in the fall, would you challenge a school mask mandate should the CDC or the governor, say that kids really need to wear masks because we have cases that are rising, or deaths, we have more deaths than we had?
Without question, we would challenge it. That's what this lawsuit is doing. We anticipate this problem will arise, where there will be more cases coming about and the governor will try to reinstate these orders. This case deals with that in advance. It's also important to realize SARS viruses, and COVID is a SARS virus, are always with us. They change seasonally, just like influenza viruses change. We're going to have COVID. It's going to be a permanent part of our background. But we can't suspend our civil liberties endlessly simply to prevent deaths. That's not what our society is organized to do. We are not mainland China, where the government can impose any rule it wants for any reason. Government here can act only with the most compelling need, not simply to keep people healthy. Are there any other questions or comments? I see a question written from Wakita Goetz. Are you from a media organization? I can't tell. The question is, what recourse, let me check the chat. What recourse do parents have if they refuse to mask their children and send their children to school in September if mask mandates are in place and children are turned away from school? Well, that's really what this case deals with. The notion that schools can't force children to be masked in order to gain their right to attend school. That the state doesn't have the right to unilaterally deny a child its public education to be present in school if the parent won't let the child wear a mask. There is a basic liberty right of the parent to regulate in part how their child lives. Merely because the governor wants to enhance the health of the state doesn't give the state the right to impose these rules on children. One thing I want to point out, in the normal rulemaking process, Expert reports are presented and studied. Experts testify in public hearings before any legislative body or agency makes any rule governing people's health needs. That hasn't happened here. There have been no hearings. There are no records kept of the governor's meetings with his staff. There aren't even hearings at CDC. What we've seen from CDC are guidelines, which are essentially press statements. There's been none of the normal expert testimony before rules are made that's necessary in our system. We don't allow, it's not mainland China. We don't allow the government to unilaterally impose rules. We have a procedure, and that has not been followed. And so we will continue this lawsuit regardless of any number of cases that increase, because the governor is not following the established procedure for making rules in New Jersey and in every other state. Yes, is there any other comments or questions?
I have a quick question. My name's Peter. I'm with WHYY Radio in Philadelphia. I missed the first couple minutes of this.
Oh.
Bruce, how do you pronounce your name?
My name is pronounced Afran, as if I was an heir to the nasal spray fortune.
Okay.
It's spelled with an A, but it's pronounced with a short I, if that helps.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions to raise?
Bruce,
Yes, Marla.
who is named in the lawsuit, and have you served notice or have you actually filed it? Can you just give us the logistics?
Yes, let me just get to the caption so I pronounce the defendant's names correctly. Clearly, Phil Murphy, the governor, is the first plaintiff. The second defendant is Angelica Allen-McMillan, who's our Commissioner of Education. And the third defendant is Judith Persichilli, the Commissioner of Health. The reason they're named is because in federal court, you can't sue the state. There's an 11th Amendment immunity issue in the Constitution, but you can sue an officer of the state to stop them from using their powers in certain ways. And so we've designed this case to bring into play those state officials who have the power to block school districts from issuing these orders, and who have assumed the power to issue executive orders. So those are the three defendants.
I'm sorry, is this a notice of claim, or is this an actual lawsuit that was filed in federal court?
There's no notice of claim because this is not arising for state law damages. This is under federal civil rights law.
Okay.
This is the actual complaint filed. The summons was issued by the court the other day, so we're going to now arrange to serve the document on the Attorney General of New Jersey. You know, one thing I would point out is that, well, no, I'm sorry, frankly, I lost the train of that thought, so excuse me. Are there any other questions or comments? I see some, just one moment. Dave Mathau from New Jersey 101.5 asks if Callie or JJ, I'm not sure who JJ refers to, could tell, maybe that means Callie's mom, Jamie, could tell us what it's like to wear a mask all day and why you don't like this. I'm sorry, JJ is Ryan's son. Callie, would you be able to answer Dave Mathau's question from 101.5 as to what it's like in your experience to wear a mask all day, if you feel like you want to answer?
I felt like it was a little bit difficult for me to understand some of the teachers and what they were saying, since the mask kind of muffled it. But I also feel like it was hard to tell how some of my classmates felt, since I wasn't exactly able to read their full expression. So it was a little bit difficult for me to, I base my actions a lot off of how people are acting and like how they feel emotionally. So it's kind of important for me to know how someone's feeling in order to know how to act around them. So all this year I was just kind of quieter, I guess, since I didn't really know how to interact with anybody, since I wasn't able to see how they were feeling.
I think Dave would like to know why you feel it's harder to know how people interact with you. What is it about mask wearing that makes that harder for you?
In my opinion, I feel like it's important for you to see somebody's mouth in order to know how they're feeling. Like, I know that eyebrows can say a lot too, but
Okay, is that all, Kelly?
And if you're mad or confused.
Oh, Kelly, I'm sorry. I think we lost you for a moment.
Oh.
After you mentioned eyebrows, could you continue what you were saying?
Like if you're mad or even confused, you might have a similar expression like based off your eyebrows, but your mouth can say something completely different. So I don't really know where I'm going with this. So I just get really confused and I just kind of don't really know how.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Dave, I think you wanted to see if JJ could make a comment. JJ, I think that means Ryan, your son.
Yes,
That's
let me ask
correct. If JJ is up to making a comment, I know this is an unusual experience for first grader.
You want to talk? No. Okay. Yeah, he's going to decline for now, but he has told me just now and in the past that it's uncomfortable and he can't breathe. When I've asked him before, all he does is he just kind of smiles sheepishly and just says can't breathe. But JJ was also one of the and Bruce, this is a point that you brought up too, in our school district, which I thought was particularly shameful because again, the young ones are at lowest risk of serious infection. The only kids that were behind plexiglass in the district were the kindergartners, which I thought was just completely absurd. And when I asked why, they said it's because they're the ones, although they're at lowest risk of infection, serious infection, they're the ones who tend to fidget with the mask much. So I would send this guy into school every day, masked up behind plexiglass. It doesn't take somebody from the scientific community or the educational community to know the detrimental effect that has on little guys.
Thank you. And I guess JJ is not quite up to radio yet, but sorry, Dave, we couldn't get you that comment. I'm glad you mentioned what you said, Ryan, because I did want to make a point that there have been no studies introduced by the state or even by CDC as to the effect of these rules on the development of children. The development of a child is a very difficult and sensitive thing. Children react in 1,000 different ways to different stimuli. We know in divorces, some children come through great, some have problems the rest of their lives. Children with bullying have different reactions. Other children in normal socializing, some are great at it, some are shy, some can't do it. Thousands of different reactions touch our children. And there's not been a single study released by the state showing the state made any inquiry at all into whether or not this mandate, these isolation and masking and segregation rules in schools will hurt children. There's been no study at all. And that's a normal part of our rulemaking process in New Jersey and every other state, that government can't issue rules unless there's been testimony and studies as to the nature of the rules. And the governor has introduced none. As far as we know, CDC has done those studies. The governor has identified none. And there is no evidence that anyone has examined the effect psychologically and developmentally on children in schools of these rules. And this really gets down to the fundamental question. There is always that type of public debate before we introduce mass rules. The comment I'll add is that when this began a year and a half ago, in March, April, May of 2020, we were faced with something new. And doctors weren't sure how to deal with these issues. And everyone assumed these rules that existed then would be short-term. But we're now a year and a half into the process. And the state has not engaged in any manner in the normal rulemaking constitutional procedure that's required. We're no longer in an emergency state. It's time for the governor to begin to realize he needs to go back to the normal way of governing the state. And the mere fact that there may be some more COVID cases starting, and there always are going to be COVID cases, does not justify this type of unilateral and frankly draconian rulemaking. Only children have been subject to these rules. And in fact, the governor's executive order opening schools up or opening camps up made an interesting point. The governor actually said in one of his executive orders, and I'll try to find it, that it's okay to open schools because they are the least dangerous public places, because they're not open to the public and only a limited number of people are there. And yet the governor continued to impose these very, very strict rules on children, even though he recognized schools are the least dangerous public places in terms of disease transmission for COVID. And when all the faculty are vaccinated and children don't suffer from this disease in any real way, there's just no governmental basis to continue these regulations. Are there any other comments from anyone else at this point?
Yeah, I have a quick comment. Again, this is Peter Krimis from WHYY in Philadelphia. I know you mentioned this before, but I want to get clear on it that you said the governor has not gone through the normal rulemaking process in making these mask mandates.
That's right.
Can you kind of explain that?
Sure.
How did he go around the normal rulemaking process?
Well, he didn't use it at all. What the governor did was he issued executive orders. He met with his counsel and 1 or 2 people, perhaps the commissioner of health, and he has issued 120 orders in detail regulating the life of every person in the state. Now, to begin with, there's actually no statute that authorizes that. The Emergency Control Act or the Disaster Control Act only authorizes the governor to use the resources of state agencies in certain short-term ways, and to take private property and use it for state purposes when necessary. There is no statute that authorizes the governor to shut down industry, to prevent people from visiting each other's homes, from limiting gatherings in family places, from limiting religious services, from shutting down businesses, and from regulating the lives of children. The only way this can be done under New Jersey's law, under what we call the Administrative Procedure Act, is for an agency such as the Commissioner of Health to propose a rule, have a public hearing, have witnesses testify as to the need to the rule, allow the public to testify and comment, allow the public to cross-examine those witnesses, and then to issue written findings that, to support the rule. Those then can be challenged in court. That is the only way rules can be made in New Jersey and every other state of the United States. And none of that was followed by the governor on any occasion. And we've now had 1.5 years, more than enough time to use the normal rulemaking process. I should point out, it normally takes no more than 60 days for an agency to propose a rule and adopt it. We've now had 1.5 years, long enough for the governor to return to the normal way of governing the state. And that's what this lawsuit in part is about, that these rules are unconstitutional in every respect. Is there anyone else? Is that Brenda?
Yeah, hi. Given the fact that at this point there is no actual restriction imposed, is it possible that the courts could come back to you and say, you don't have a case yet until essentially the governor steps in and makes it a problem?
Thank you, Brenda. That's a very, very good question. Actually, the US Supreme Court dealt with this very issue in the religion cases in Manhattan, in Brooklyn. If you recall, Governor Cuomo had ordered certain parts of Brooklyn under a strict regime under which no more than 10 people could go to any house of worship, regardless of the size of the institution. And even though all other businesses in public places were not subject to such rules. The lower courts ruled in favor of the governor. The Supreme Court intervened, and the governor argued that, well, I've dropped those rules. I've now eliminated them, and now they don't apply anymore. So we don't need to have the case go forward. The Supreme Court said very bluntly, the governor has reserved the right to reinstate these rules. And for that reason, this case is still ripe and ready to be heard. The same situation exists here. Governor Murphy has bluntly said he reserves the right to reinstate these rules on children. And he's gone further. He's actually authorized school districts to individually issue such rules. And I want to point out, school districts don't have the power under state law to do this. Any health order in a classroom can only be issued by the Commissioner of Health and Commissioner of Education after public hearings. And so the governor does not even have the power to authorize school districts to do this. So the case is still ripe and ready to be heard, basically on the same reasoning as in the New York religion cases, because the governor still asserts the power to do this. And in this case, he's ordered school districts that they may do it on their own. And by the way, other courts have dealt with the same issue and upheld these cases are still ripe, as long as the governors are reserving the power to continue the rules. So we have every confidence that the case will go forward. The result I can't predict, but I can say the case should go forward. Is there anyone else?
Yes. Hi, Mr. Afran. My name is Haley Gutting. I'm a reporter with WFUV News. I also missed the first few minutes of the stream. I just wanted to get your exact title and relation to the case.
Oh, certainly. My name is Bruce Afran. I'm an attorney at law of New Jersey and New York, but that's not really relevant. I am the counsel for Free NJ Kids and for the plaintiffs who are named in the case. So I'm the attorney for the group that has come together to challenge any attempt to reimpose these orders on school children in New Jersey.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Haley. Anyone else at this point with anything to add in or questions rather? Okay, well, if that's the case, I will close this news conference. Let me just note that we did this on Zoom, not because of any fear of disease, but simply because of the convenience on short notice.
Mr. Afran?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. May I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
I'm sorry. I had in the chat messages.
My
I am
apologies.
not a reporter, but I'd like to better understand why you think that Governor Murphy's laws have not been challenged federally up to this point, if they were successfully challenged in other states who had governors basically imposing similar restrictions.
Thank you. That's actually an excellent question. I was consulted by several restaurant groups last year, actually, in the spring of 2020, to examine whether lawsuits could be brought challenging many of the rules that the governor had ordered through executive orders. And frankly, some of them, were not necessarily rational in that there was no reason why, if you're sitting at a table eating, you don't need a mask, but if you happen to walk to the bathroom, you did. Why one could have 10 people at a table from 3 or 4 families, but no one could sit at a bar. So there are many rules the governor issued that really impacted businesses, particularly restaurants. And I was consulted by several restaurant groups who wanted to bring a suit. In the end, they did not. And the reason they didn't was they were fearful of retaliation by the Alcohol Board of Control. They were fearful that the ABC, as we call it, would come in and look for violations if they challenged the executive orders. Now, I don't know that the governor would retaliate in that way. I personally advised, I thought they were exaggerating that fear, but that fear is real. People were fearful in business of challenging these rules because they're afraid of regulatory retaliation. That's one reason. And I think the other reason, frankly, is that everyone kept thinking these are going to be short-term. The perspective was, well, we're going to flatten the curve, crush the curve, whatever the word is. 3-4 weeks will be done. People are tolerant for 2 months if there's an emergency, 3 months. Then they were told, well, we're going to continue this for a shorter period of time, another 2 months. So the perception was always it's going to be short-term. And I think people just didn't want to invest their resources and commitment because of that. But primarily businesses, I think, were fearful of making these challenges. That's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you, Mr. Afran. In
You're
that
welcome.
line of thought, if you are successful in this lawsuit, will it also impact New Jersey college students who are facing similar restrictions?
That's a very interesting question. Colleges, well, frankly, I think the reasoning would. Private colleges may have more freedom to do what they want. Public colleges probably would be subject to the same type of court ruling. But remember, there is a difference also between adults who sit in a classroom for an hour at a time, 4 times a week, and school children who are in class 7 to 8 hours all day, 5 days a week. The mask burden in a classroom is much, much worse on school children than on college students. Also, college students have already developed most of their communication skills. School children are first learning that. So there's a greater injury from this on younger children, even high school children, than perhaps college students. But I think the reasoning would still apply. I don't think state universities have the legal power to impose these rules. I'll be honest with you, I teach at Rutgers Law School, and come the fall, if they're ordering teachers to wear masks in the classroom, I probably won't. Personally, I have lymphoma, so it's uncomfortable for me. But frankly, it affects my ability to teach. I can't breathe for 2 hours and stand in a room and teach. So I don't know if that rule will be imposed at Rutgers, but it would trouble me personally to teach in that way. It would be very difficult. I think it does affect learning, actually. I think it's very difficult. I mean, people have difficulty sitting on a plane for 2 or 3 hours wearing a mask. It's really no different sitting in a lecture at college for 2 hours. So I think the reasoning, if we prevail in this case, I think much of that reasoning will apply to colleges. It's hard to predict, actually, and there are differences.
Thank you. I asked that because I'm working with several groups of state college student parents who are extremely concerned about the unreasonable restrictions that are being put on students who have approved religious and medical exemptions on their campuses.
Well,
And I understand.
Yeah, let me just say this. It makes no sense, frankly, if in all retail environments, theaters, stadiums, religious houses, that no one needs a mask, no one needs separation, no one needs plexiglass dividers, yet in colleges we need it. You know, really, again, these are less intense environments for the most part. And it really makes no sense that in education, we're still mandating what we have given up everywhere else in society. I mean, think about the absurdity. 20 people can crowd around the bar, yet 20 people in a classroom have to be masked and divided and separated. There's just no logic to it. And when you consider that even college students are not really susceptible to this, it makes no sense. I have to be honest, one reason I think these rules are persisting in education is because there are unions that are demanding it. There are unions whose members are fearful, and I think union pressure is continuing to keep these rules in schools and in colleges and universities. And, you know, in other aspects of life, the citizen is not affected by unions. You know, you go to a restaurant, you're not affected by the restaurant union. But in colleges and schools, unions have a great deal of sway. And I think that's the true reason these rules are being continued in education when they're not being used elsewhere. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you all. I am available if anyone needs follow-up. I think you have my information on the news advisory.